The Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute is driving bold policy solutions for a resilient Canadian agri-food system and building a stronger future for Canadian agriculture. Visit capi-icpa.com to discover how.
You're listening to the Ag Policy Connection, brought to you by Real Agriculture in partnership with the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. We're connecting the dots between the people and the policies that shape agriculture and farming today and into the future.
Welcome to the Ag Policy Connection, a podcast where we talk about big ideas and the fresh thinking needed to solve the big challenges and seize the big opportunities facing Canadian agriculture and food. I'm one of your hosts, Tyler McCann, the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. I've been working in ag policy and politics for 20 years, and I'm a policy wonk.
And I'm not, but I'm your other host, Elise Bigley, the Director of Strategic Projects at CAPI, Canada's Agriculture and Food think tank. In this podcast, we'll be talking to leaders across agriculture and food about their big ideas to create generational change in ag policy.
That's right, Elise. We think the time has come for ag policy to catch up with the changes happening on farms, in processing facilities, and across the system that produces food and more and gets it to customers in Canada and around the world. We are excited to work with Real Agriculture to bring some of the big ideas for change to you.
Thanks, Tyler. And with that, let's get started. So today we're joined by Dave Sullivan. Dave is the Chief Executive Officer of Global Ag Risk Solutions, GARS. He started at GARS in 2015 and has years of experience as an agrologist, ag retail manager, sales manager for Bayer Crop Science, and farm management consultant with MNP. We're excited to hear from him today. So Dave, welcome to the Ag Policy Connection.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. So let's just jump right in. Dave, what's your big idea?
Yeah, my big idea is to modernize the BRM programs in Canadian agriculture to include private insurers and private capital in the BRM programs, right from premium subsidies to risk sharing with the public and the private capital.
Great. Thanks for that overview, Dave. So before we dive more into that big idea, we want to hear about the journey that led you to this idea. So can you tell us about your career and experience in agricultural risk management?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to family farm south of Moose Jaw, mixed farm growing mostly durum, canola, chickpeas, lentils, 100% no-till since the early days of no-till, early adopter in most tech. I went to university after high school and then ended up back working ag retail in and around the area. And then after doing an MBA, I landed at M&P. And during my time at M&P, I learned about farm financial analysis and met the guys that founded Global Ag Risk partway through my career at M&P there. Through that relationship, I became, and my family farm became one of the first customers to Global Ag Risk back in 2011. My understanding of the program because of my work at M&P and then how Global Ag works with their product was very comparable and aligned very well with my way of thinking. So we used it on my farm from 2011. Then I started working there in 2011 through as in sales and then in marketing, eventually working myself through COO and then to CEO most recently. And we've recently sold the company to Hub International about a year ago. So my title's actually technically no longer CEO because I'm now Executive Vice President at Global Ag Risk because the Hub can only have one CEO. So that sort of being a customer first and then coming to Global Ag to be a part of it because I understood what it did for our farm and the changes we were able to implement using private insurance that fit our business better than the public offerings was something that I was excited to bring to more and more people. And we've managed to do that in my career over the last decade at Global Ag Risk. We've expanded our footprint, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba. We've moved ourselves now. We did do business in the US pre-COVID. That business was shut down during the COVID shutdowns, unfortunately. But my experience now with the Canadian ag industry as well, we developed a parametric insurance line, which are weather derivatives. We've done some work with federal and provincial governments and producer groups for programming to try and build new offerings of insurance for mostly you'd be in the cow-calf space to improve upon the forage rainfall insurance program that's offered using the rain buckets, and this would be modernizing it using satellite programs. So all of that to say, I've touched sort of the greater private BRM programs in a lot of different ways, and we're always sort of working alongside, sometimes competing, sometimes being a complement to the public program, and finding our way to carve out our little niche in Western Canada. When I say little, though, I mean we've done hundreds of millions of dollars worth of business and billions of dollars worth of risk, focused, based out of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
So Dave, I want to go back a couple of steps. You talked about kind of the farm growing up on, going to school. You talked about kind of the mindset when you think about these things and what you saw at MNP when you were there. How do you think about kind of the way farmers think about risk management? What was that like when you were growing up, when you were in school? And how do you think that might be different today, kind of this broader context about risk management in ag?
Yeah, and I think my sort of trajectory was through, I think a lot of farms view risk more on the production side, as the biggest risk is just bushels, and we're very focused on maximizing bushels. When I went to school as an agronomist, most of the conversations in that space are around how do you grow more bushels. Then my time at M&P was really around that farm business and understanding the levers you can pull on a farm to improve the overall business outcomes, which those business outcomes will directly affect what programs and how programs will work for your farm. And that, I was at M&P during the transition from CASE to agri-stability, and I remember the old grip days back on the farm, and the agri-invest. And when you understood how to look at a farm business in a way that was using the farm financial analysis to do real business analysis and understand how we should analyze a farm and understand what we're doing to drive the outcome that we actually want, which is profitability and sustainability. And when I say sustainability, I use it in the term of economic sustainability. How do we make a farm that's viable now, but also going to be viable in the future, whether there's market ups and downs or production up and downs? And that sort of, changed my lens to thinking through the greater impact of business decisions that are not just production risk, that are the business risk we create by locking in certain fixed costs like land rent, machinery investment, interest rates, those types of things, which really don't have anything to do with production necessarily. And then how we can use production and use direct inputs to drive out the best ROI and create that layer of profit and also a layer of safety in the event of a downturn. And all of that is sort of that M&P's model, which they brought over from the UK back in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Dave, I think you touched on something that has come up a lot. So in the policy world, we've heard a lot of discussion about Canada's productivity problem and how we need to boost our productivity over and over again. But productivity does not equal profitability. And I think sometimes people in government, as they've got really caught up in we need to fix our productivity issue, that doesn't necessarily mean we fix our growth issue. And I wonder kind of your thoughts around kind of how farmers think about that too, and that idea of moving from thinking about yield and production risk to profitability and margin risk instead. Is that a big change that's happening? Where do you kind of think that mindset fits in the broader landscape?
Yeah, and I think it's slow to evolve, because as generations exit the industry and new people come in, it's all about their context. And having worked in both the U.S. and Canada in the insurance space, production is depends on how you measure it. So we're measuring tons of production. Are we measuring revenue, or are we measuring production that's profitable? Because I've dealt with a lot of farms in the U.S. that would grow 100% more bushels than a Canadian farm, but couldn't be profitable unless they had their subsidies that were propping them up. And I see in Canada, we make choices to grow crops that are less productive. They grow fewer bushels, but we do it because it's more profitable. Our shift into lentils and chickpeas on my family farm is directly driven by, back in the wheat board days, but our inability to make a great profit on wheat and durum. So we transition into pulse crops because we saw an opportunity to make more money. Yet we grow half the bushels. But those bushels are highly profitable. And actually, it's the only thing on the farm that actually makes money consistently is our pulse crops. And so I think we need to define what we mean by it. And also, production for production's sake, in my opinion, is a waste of everybody's energy. We need to be growing the food in the places where the environment matches the risk. And for my farm, growing, a mix of pulse crops, and cereals and a little bit of oil seeds. That's our right rotation. For a farm in northeast Saskatchewan, growing lentils would be a very bad idea. They get way more rain than we should, so they should be growing, barley and oats and busheling, high bushels of canola. And that's going to be the most economically viable, most productive rotation for that farm. And I think that's the other thing that also gets lost in the Canadian context is we are subject to the amount of water that falls from the sky, and that hasn't changed in 10,000 years. The amount of organic matter, the amount of carbon in the soil, how many bushels we can grow is based on that long-term trend of how much rain we get between the growing season, and we can't escape it. And there are places in North America that certainly grow a lot more bushels than we do, because they get more rain every year, or they have irrigation. Unless Canada is going to invest big dollars in irrigation, we're going to be limited by that limiting factor is how much rain we get in the growing season. And our short growing season, just our frost-free period, limits the crop selection as well. Just how many days do you have to grow a crop also, is a big factor on your productivity. So my argument is to ignore bushels and focus on profit. And I'm not sure as an industry we've decided what's more important.
Thanks, Dave. So I want to bring us back to your idea. Why do you think change in agricultural risk management in the BRM suite is needed now?
Yeah, I guess it's partly my own experience on the farm, understanding the lack of fit of traditional crop insurance as we were transitioning from 50-50 farming, between summer fallow and stubble, moving into 100% no-till, 100% continuous cropping. The challenges that created over time, because our yield guarantees were much, much lower when we were transitioning through to continuous cropping, seeing the impact that had on my family's farm. The adoption of global ag risk when we were able to use it because it was margin based, and then understanding through the last decade of being, rubbing shoulders with, the bureaucrats and politicians over the years of being like, well, why hasn't crop insurance in Canada changed? Why aren't there programs available for other sectors of agriculture in Canada? And it's slow to change because of the system that we've built. And then doing business in the US and looking at, it's a publicly funded sector that's privately run. And I'm not proposing that one would copy the US crop insurance delivery. It's fraught with its own trappings. But what it does generate through the multiple AIPs, I believe there's 12 AIPs, approved insurance providers in the US that deliver the federal crop insurance program. They have innovation coming every single year from all of these companies, because the way they compete because they all sell the exact same product at the exact same price. The only way for them to compete is with service and innovation. And so that to try and gain market share, they will build new products and build new ideas and build service offerings to capture new commodities, to capture larger market shares in desirable risk spaces. And so that innovation has led to, for the US at least, a huge increase in the number of products and the number of sectors that are being well insured. And in Canada, we just don't see that. I believe it's a symptom of the public system versus a private system. And the public system does a great job of insuring bushels for crop producers. It's doing an okay job of some other spaces, but we have, big lacking relative to our peers in the US because I believe it's a symptom of that sort of public bureaucracy and the system we have chosen, which requires buy-in from the majority of provinces to make any changes, which is, increasingly difficult to get consensus and increasingly difficult to find the money. The other piece that the private insurers offer is capital. As a taxpayer, I'm often offended by some of the things that the governments have to pay for. If we want to reduce the reliance on taxpayer dollars in the BRM space, we can do so by partnering with private companies that will put risk capital up and share in the risk with the taxpayer, and with the farmer. And I think that's a way of increasing how much risk the programs could take on, because it wouldn't be 100% on the farmer and the taxpayer. We can bring that private capital into the industry from all over the world. And Canada is a desirable place to do business for the insurers and reinsurers around the world. We have good rule of law, court systems, low fraud, English speaking makes it a very easy place to do business, but it's essentially a closed system because of the monopolies that are out there. Global Ag Risk is weird to be able to be a successful company in a mostly public subsidized space. Doing it with no subsidy and no public dollars is a difficult thing to achieve. All of that to say is that the opportunities are there to access private innovation and private capital with some tweaks to the BRM program.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Dave. But you said a word that we often don't hear when we're talking about risk management in Canadian agriculture, and that's taxpayer. And it's I think that there's always this challenge, right, where you can see why farmers want a program that will support them in as much of a way as possible, right? You might as well call it a spade, right? It's in their interest to make sure that we can kind of maximize the full potential of that public investment. Kind of a discussion around whether or not it's the right way to spend that money or not is kind of set that aside for the time being. But I often think that that's partly because part of the reason why we don't talk about it is because we don't fully understand where those public dollars, how they go into the crop insurance system, right? The program, where I don't think people realize that they are only paying 40 cents of the dollar when it comes to the crop insurance premium, that the taxpayers are subsidizing the other 60%.
Well, and it's also written to 100% or near 100% loss ratio. So call it a 95% loss ratio, which is impossible for a private company to run at. That's essentially being run as a charity. So you're only paying 40% of the premium, and it's written to a very high loss ratio. So net, the producer is probably paying what would be equivalent to about 20 cents on the dollar if it was run completely as a private industry. And I would suggest that if farmers had to pay, if that represents 20% of the actual risk premium that's needed, that would be, which farmers already complain that it's expensive. But if that had to be 100% of that dollar, that $10 premium becomes a $50 premium very quickly if it was run as a wholly. So I'm not suggesting that you could run the entire industry as a privately run industry. I believe there's no example globally where there's a program that has big uptake that does not include taxpayer funding in some fashion, either through premium subsidy or risk sharing or both. And so the program will require, all programs that have any amount of uptake will require a public participation for it to be successful, just because agriculture is so risky because of the weather, because of the markets. That risk creates very high premiums. And that opportunity is not to replace the existing system, but it's actually to build things that could complement the existing system and work around it and fill in the gaps that it currently doesn't cover. And I'd suggest, crop insurance does a good job of covering bushels. They do an okay job of covering quality, but the private industry could do, the market impact, cost of inputs, what global ag does. We could complement it very well. And then in other industries where there just isn't enough, there are small niche industries, private insurers could come in and build products if there was a way to de-risk it for the private company to come in, because there are products around the world that could be brought into Canada. There's companies doing these things around the world, and a lot of them are just across the U.S. border that want to come into Canada and do these types of insurance offerings, but without the public dollars, they'll never come.
But is part of the elephant in the room, Dave, that again, one of the big winners is, Global Agri-Risk Solutions shareholders, like that it does change the dynamic with something like this. Whenever there's private companies that stand to gain private things compared to this kind of system today, when it's crown corporations and governments that are doing it instead. How do you got to deal with that dynamic and that concern that producers are going to have, that ultimately all this system's going to do is make guys like you richer?
Yeah, and I think that's, I would not apologize. We're capitalists. If we were to see this change that I want, the next BRM program included private insurers, we would have first mover advantage. We're already here. I've got a team of people in Western Canada that we would immediately be able to put to work doing either our existing product or new products. We'd have a head start for sure. And that's going to make us richer, definitely. On the side of that, though, is my competitors some of them are currently selling hail insurance in Canada. Some of them are just down in the US or around the world, where they would come into Canada and start making offers of insurance. And you would see a flurry of innovation enter into the market if the programs were designed to make the products attractive for customers, for the farmer, but also there's a view that it could be profitable for the private company. Those companies would come to Canada and bring more and more products, competition to the marketplace, which would reduce premiums. We'd also see, I believe, a modernization or a pressure to modernize our service delivery methods. Gone are the days of everything being done with a clipboard and a pen. There are ways we could make these things faster and more seamless, because the competition would be on not just product, but also on delivery. And that pressure would then also apply to our public programs. And we should be improving and pushing for improvement to our crown corporations as well. So the short term, yes, we would be a big winner. But in the long term, I think the industry, and grain farmers being my main customer, would be a big benefactor, because it's the largest industry in agriculture in Canada. But I also believe a lot of the smaller niches, and they're not really niches, they're big industries, cow-calf, a lot of the fruit growers, grape growers, vegetable production, all of these crops that we grow coast to coast to coast could benefit from private innovation. But you have to make an environment where it's attractive to do business. And right now we've got an environment where it's viewed as a closed system. And if a private company wants to participate in the Canadian insurance market, their way to do it is through reinsurance, which is they take a small sliver of the risk, and that's really all they can do. But there's no margin to be made through being an insurer or being, product delivery, which is a whole, stream of business that right now is handled mostly by the crown corporations. And then, we're one example of private industry. I think the hail insurance world is a good example of what private industry does. We have public dollars in the hail business. Alberta and Manitoba have hail insurance. And then we have the private industry sitting alongside it, complementing it and competing with it. And that drives rates down for the farmer because we've got competition. And we end up with innovation like the online model that was, innovated by AgDirect a number of years ago. And many of the players have copied to do, we have our online model, we have our agent delivered model, and then we have our public model that's delivered through AFSC and NASC. I think it's a good example of how it can work. And it's, why not the other sectors in the risk management, bucket?
Thanks, Dave. I want to get into kind of a question of the trade-offs. So you've talked about who would benefit from this. We talked about the elephant in the room, but just what can you dive into some of the maybe negative externalities of your big idea? And then following on that, the assumption is that there would be hesitation or resistance to that change towards that big idea. How would we deal, or how do we deal with these barriers to change, kind of looking into the future?
Yeah, and I think so. In the beginning, it would not be more efficient, because as private companies enter the market to attract that capital and attract that network of private players, it would need to be in a way that makes it attractive for them to enter the marketplace. It would take time for it to scale and gain the efficiencies of larger businesses. Right now, the public crown corporations are run very efficiently. They have 70 to 90% market share, depending on the province. They run very simple programs. They've ran them for decades. And so it's very, not easy, but they've got that head start of an efficient business model. To bring in that private company, you may see a reduction in that efficiency of what it's costing for delivery of the program to the marketplace, to the farmers, because of you're just going to be chopping up the market into a few smaller pieces. So you might see some increased cost of delivery, but the cost of delivery is a very small portion of the overall cost of the program. The vast majority of the cost of the program is in the risk side. The cost of delivery is a rounding error relative to the cost of the actual risk. The other side of this is I think we need to maybe step back and look at how we even look at the risks in the programs. Right now, it's very provincially segmented. And so each province has their own bucket of risk. They run their programs the way they run them. They might participate in the federal risk sharing scheme, or they may not. They may participate in reinsurance, or they may not. But they do it on a very provincial basis. From an efficiency standpoint, if I'm designing something from scratch, as an insurer, I would much rather have the risk spread coast to coast, because then I get the benefit of, the weather differences between each of the locations. I can offset a drought in Western Canada with good conditions in Ontario, and I can survive with a better, smoother loss ratio over time relative to having things provincially cut up. So we would propose that you would have a national program where we would spread risk across all provinces, rather than trying to bucket them into each of their provincial boundaries, because Mother Nature does not care about provincial boundaries. Those imaginary lines we've drawn 150 years ago, or 100 years ago in some cases, those imaginary lines don't really matter to Mother Nature. So why would we try and create insurance programs that use those imaginary lines as the delineating areas? What was the second question you asked there was around, remind me.
It was the barriers to change.
The barrier to change.
Yeah.
So I would say The feedback that I've gotten, I've done dozens and dozens of meetings with producer groups, trade associations, government bureaucrats, and politicians. I'd say there's sort of two groups that have evolved. One is the the farm segments that are not well served by the current BRM programs, and they are sort of almost 100% on board. Let's try something new. Private sounds better than what we've got because what we've got is essentially nothing or near nothing. We're essentially flying with agri stability, and that's all we've got. And so we want some new programs. Let's have private industry try and bring those programs to the market. They're on board. The sector that is less in favor of any change is the grain sector. And so the grain growers are well served by the crown corporations. And it's even in the name of the crown corporations. Crop insurance is literally in the name, but crop insurance is only one piece of the puzzle. That group of people, I think, rightly so, are worried that if we open up the BRM programs for change, the changing might be negative for them as the grain growers. There could be things thrown into the act that might be negative for their outcome. Right now they're well subsidized, well run programs. There's risk in opening it up. So their ask is don't wreck the thing we've already got because it works well and it's efficient. So let's not break it. Let's supplement it. Let's complement it. And I get that. I also don't want to see, something that we do have, which is well run. The crown corporations are well run organizations. I think they could be improved by the innovation the private companies can bring, but I don't want to see, the thin edge of the wedge if we open up the act and suddenly a whole bunch of new things are thrown in there that waters down or hurts the performance of those programs. And so that nervousness, I think, has merit for sure.
Right. I want to ask, what would you say to grain growers that have the resistance? Like it's working for them. How do we get them on board to make this change?
I think the most recent past is a good example. So their programs, 2021 is a great example. The drought, the crop insurance programs reacted very quickly. They had dollars, they had money in their pockets to survive and grow another crop the next year. But then in 2025, we've seen all of this trade issues with China and the US and around the world. India's throwing new tariffs on. The crop insurance program doesn't react at all. Right now, luckily, if they're participating in agri stability, they might be being well covered by agri stability because of the sort of the Olympic average being only the last 5 years. We've seen this rapid decline in margins that agri stability should pick up, but agri stability has such a low uptake that a lot of farmers are not going to see any dollars from that program, and crop insurance will not react at all. And I think it's I'd say the arm twisting would come from the program that they currently enjoy only is protecting them for a portion of the risk that they are now experiencing. And it has had an opportunity to change over the last number of decades, and it has not. And it's not changing as quickly as the industry is changing. And if we want change to react to what is on the horizon in the future, private industry will do that. We're inventing new products this year that we're launching into the market to react to the changes we're seeing with agri stability coverage and the needs that farmers have that are not just yield based, but to react to volatility in the market and volatility of input prices, which are also partially impacted by trade. So all of that is to say you want better. Well, better isn't coming if we leave it the way it is. Better does have risk that, yes, we have to open up the act to make some changes. But if you want better, we can't continue to do things the way we've always done them. We need to think outside the box. And I believe that private industry is standing here, idling, ready to go. If we get the opportunity, it will react and it will improve the industry longer term. And those grain farmers will be better served than they currently are. but so will, the myriad of other industries that currently are underserved.
Right. So if we're thinking outside the box, you're saying private industry is outside the box waiting patiently
Yeah.
for the producers. I want to dive in just a little bit more on the role of producers in this. So I was at Agriculture Excellence run by Farm Management Canada last week in Winnipeg, and those farmers are very risk savvy. They're by nature of being there, and there was a lot of discussion on proactive versus reactive risk management. And I'm just thinking in terms of this change and big idea that you're proposing, what is the producer's role in this, and do these changes work for everyone, or are they going to work for producers that are already thinking about this and already proactively thinking about risk and ways that they can contribute to that on their farm?
Well, I think any change that comes is always going to be, taken advantage by those farms that are most innovative, that are most on the ball. That's just natural with anything that's on the horizon and any new opportunity. I think the most business savvy producers will learn and understand the quickest and be the early adopters, in that bell curve of customer adoption. Um, those people will win, so to speak. Those people that are those last to adopt will probably not like these changes because it's new, it's different, it requires, changing how you look at your insurance options, or how you might understand what's best for your farm. You might have to pay somebody to help you understand it. And that's, unfortunately, that is just a fact of any change in the marketplace. The opportunity for the industry as a whole, I think, is the understanding that a producer gets of their own business by looking at it through the lens of BRM and understanding their own farm risk gives you a reason to go to the trouble of understanding your break evens, understanding your cost of production, and looking at what levers you might be pulling to improve or worsen your farm's outcomes. The BRM program just kind of highlights it for everyone. And oftentimes when we do the work for the financial analysis that we do at Global Ag, we give it back to the farmer. And oftentimes they tell us that this is the simplest, easiest analysis for them to understand. And they've never had anybody explain it to them. And they don't know how traditional crop insurance works and how agri stability works, because it's in their minds, it's the only option. And so it's not worth spending a lot of time thinking about. So they just default to, well, I'll buy what I bought last year, even though that may not be the best decision. And so that lack of options creates sort of an apathy. And I think as an industry, we see it in our farm level understanding of their own business, their own break evens. When any survey that gets done shows there's a huge part of the industry that does not have their fingers on the pulse of their business costs. And I think the BRM lens can really change that. I think all of the options that you might have at your fingertips makes you have to make decisions. And how do you make that decision is doing the research and also doing the analysis on your own business. And I think that would really improve the outcomes for the industry as a whole, actually.
Well, and I think, Dave, that's one of the reasons why we tried to earlier this year look at proactive versus reactive risk management, partly to say, as much as we need a public sector and this government support for risk management programs, we also need to make sure we're providing the right incentives for farmers to be doing those things that you just talked about.
Yep.
But one of the other earlier, Dave, you talked about how we have these crown corporations. You referred to them as well-run corporations, but part of the reason why you are where you are today and why I think your idea has merit is that kind of the concept of a margin insurance or a different delivery model, like those aren't new or different, or again, if you look around the world, aren't necessarily particularly innovative. These things are happening other places. It's partly because of the crown corporations and the governments that we have today being unable to innovate that create this space where we've got this logjam. So I guess I'm curious as to your thoughts, Dave. Like, if governments were doing their jobs, delivering effective risk management tools to farmers, would we need your solution, or could governments fix this on their own? And I'll point out that I think if you go back and look in 2021 and the lead up to the last framework, the provincial government in Alberta was trying to figure out how to do margin-based insurance. I think the federal government then and still today is trying to figure out some revenue margin product too. Apparently, I think everybody seems to be casting around trying to come up with some new idea. Talked to cattle producers on the prairies about forage insurance and kind of how long work has been underway to get a new forage insurance product. Like the idea, the things that we need to innovate aren't particularly new, but how much of kind of where we are today is helped by the fact that, let's be honest, the provincial governments and the federal government haven't been able to figure out how to innovate in this space in the meantime.
And I would say, when my comment is they're well run, is that they're efficient. They're smart people. They run the programs that exist very well. But I don't think innovation is in their core capabilities. It's also not in my opinion, from anything I've seen, it's not in their mandate. They're to do it, hit their KPIs, cost of delivery, the cost of the program, the actuarially soundness of the program that exists today. And then, and so then, innovation becomes sort of secondary to that. And that's hard. In my world, innovation is front and center because we know that we have to move fast and we have to be innovative and staying ahead of the curve, because if we rely on the things we did last year and the year before, they'll become eventually stale and the market will move past us. And so for us, innovation is front and center. And I think in private industry, that is the case generally across the board until you get, monopolies create apathy, I suppose. And we live in that world where we don't enjoy monopoly, so we have to innovate. The other side of it is a little bit like asking, going to dinner with a group of 10 friends and asking where everybody wants to go for supper. You'll never make a decision. But if one person just says, "Hey, we're going to the keg," everyone goes, "Great." And because everyone's happy enough with the decision that gets made, but they themselves can't make the decision. There's no way of getting to that decision point. And I think that's where the unfortunate reality of the federal provincial BRM programs is stuck, is that we have to create alignment amongst the majority of the provinces to get change. And we saw it with the agri-stability changes that, just right before the last election, the federal government's announced, "Hey, we're changing it." And then Alberta and Saskatchewan stood up and were like, "Hey, we never agreed to this." And it took until, just recently for that to become put into law. And farmers were left for months not knowing, was the program going to be run at 80% or 90%? Not that that was a huge change, but it was a big enough change that it potentially could have changed some BRM decision making at the time. And that lack of alignment, which, whether it's just a symptom of all things government or it's a symptom of the times where we have more right versus left, and this widening out of decision making, and there's less coming together to make what's the best decision for the country, and we're too much politics being involved in the decision making. I don't know the cause, but the symptom certainly seems to be the pace of innovation is slow. And lastly, I think those people in the federal and provincial governments and crown corporations, they're all great, but they do not want to be embarrassed by launching a product that doesn't go well. If they have to unwind something, nobody wants to be the person that launched a product that wasn't successful. And we hear about it, constantly with the NDVI program in Alberta that ran, tried to do for forage insurance, and then they ended up canceling it because it wasn't working. Producers weren't happy with how it worked. That gets brought up as an example as, well, we can't do that because look at what happened with the NDVI program. And with public dollars, I can understand that. On the private side, there's a little bit of a not ready, fire, aim, but certainly we will embrace beta. We will try things and put them into the marketplace, get customer feedback, because the best way to learn whether your product is working is put it into the marketplace and see what your customers actually think. And then you can change it and you can augment it to improve it over time. with that customer feedback. But if you never launch, you never get any customer feedback. And I think that speed to market sometimes is a benefit where you take risk. And it's not doing a pilot project with a handful of producers. It's unfortunately can be really painful and embarrassing if it fails. But the benefit of it is speed and innovation can come quickly and rapidly, and you can bring things to the market that don't exist if you're not afraid of sometimes, yeah, you're going to have programs that don't go well.
David, there's this interesting parallel with spaceships, right? With if you look at the NASA model, right, the public agency government that does not want to see rockets blow up, and you
Right.
compare that to the SpaceX model, which is, to be honest, been pretty happy, it seems, to see their rockets go up.
Yeah, they
They blow
learned
them
what
up, they
the
learn, they
breaking point
reiterate.
was.
Yeah,
Yep.
they innovate and change, and again, I think it creates this cultural difference inside kind of public versus private. But I wonder just kind of your thoughts. Maybe this is my last question to you, but how much of this is a cultural issue on the prairies? That this idea of we've got crown corporations that are delivering a product, we know the product, we're safe with the product, we're comfortable with the service. Maybe it's not the best service, maybe it's not the most efficient, maybe it's not the most affordable, but we know what we like it compared to this idea of something different. Because like in most of the rest of the economy, we're not happy with public sector delivery anymore. Most of the rest of the economy, we want change. I think in this era kind of healthcare, we see this increasing push to say, we need to look at delivery outside of the public system. We need to be prepared to do things different. But on this, there really does seem to be a reluctance to look at what role can the private sector play. Because I'm just curious, how much of that is this cultural dynamic of we're comfortable with how things are today, um, is at play, and how much of that is a barrier to change?
Yeah, and I think, farmers recognize that in Canada we do have a good program, and the alternatives that are there. Yeah, the US looks bright and shiny, but globally, there's not many programs around the world that someone can say, "Hey, I want to change to have what they have." Like short of the US, there's not many great programs around the world. So there's a nervousness of don't break what ain't, you know, don't break. What's the statement? The don't
Don't
fix what ain't
fix what
broken.
ain't broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's some nervousness because there's like, well, where would we go to find something better? We can't afford the public dollars are not there to do what the US does. So that's off the table. Um, so it would be something that, an innovation born in Canada is you're not able to just copy off of some other country where you can say, well, here's a great working example of where this is functioning, and you can just here's the notes, go ahead. Um, so it's going to be risky. It's going to have some trial and error, I suppose, trying to get it right, and that creates nervousness for change. Again, that's I think why I saw the two very different groups in through the industry. That grain grower group is like, don't break it. The other groups are like, hey, let's do anything because what we've got is not sufficing, and that is real. And I understand the Saskatchewan and Alberta, Manitoba, especially majority the biggest part of their dollars is the crop insurance program, and so that's a bit of a golden goose, so to speak. They don't want to hurt it. Um, and I think that's a real concern, and we need to figure out a way to make sure that that program, well, because it's well run and it's efficient, can exist in the way that it does. And maybe there's options where the innovation that gets built in the private industries eventually gets folded into the public institutions, into the crown corporations, or folded into the federal delivery of the program through changes that might be made to agri stability. If we have private innovation, you have to make it so that private companies will be rewarded for that, so that they will bring those opportunities to the table. If they feel like they're going to get stolen, so to speak, they won't bring them, because you're not going to build something that's short lived. It has to see a decade of runway ahead of it. As a business leader, you need to know that this is a secure place to do business. And that's, I think, going to be the challenge, is finding that how do we find the compromise between the public system that works today and the public innovation that can be there, and the public, you want to attract those private companies with some public dollars, but do it efficiently. But also, things like intellectual property and data sharing. There's actually a problem even before we even get really started on the concepts is data inside of the Canadian space. We don't have the RMA data available like the US does. That data lake brings innovation, makes product innovation possible because you can go out and do the math and see what works behind closed doors, and then you bring it to the public. In Canada, we don't have that data lake that's available. Sometimes gets made available to researchers and universities from time to time, but it's certainly not available to the industry, at least not that I'm aware of. That is one of the things that would be key to this is actually that data sharing and data lake to allow for the innovation to even begin. One of the reasons I have that first mover advantage that I talked about as an existing private company is that we have a data lake. I have 15 years of data that we've built our business from that makes us able to innovate into the next product and the next and the next. And we have that advantage. If you want innovation, it's going to have to be some sort of data sharing made available to the marketplace that the taxpayer dollars have paid for. Actually, all of that data, in my opinion, is public data because it's taxpayer paid data. We should be using it for its greatest good.
Thanks, Dave. And I get to ask the last question of the day. So, thinking ahead 5 years from now, what do you think will be different? And in the middle of that 5 years, we will have a new agricultural policy framework. So, within that question, do you think some of this change will be reflected in that? And if it isn't reflected, what do you think will happen?
Well, I would give it somewhere between a 10 and 20% odds that this might see some level of change is included in the BRM program for the next round. And then I believe it might be the round after that. So whatever that would be, 8 years from now, 7 or 8 years from now, where we saw the potential change of this BRM program. I think it's going to take that long, probably realistically, to make the whole change that would be required to bring it. But it's going to take a baby step somewhere. I hope that we would make the big step. My hope would be that we could do pilot projects right now using existing budget dollars that are there today to pilot how this might look and go break some things for 2026 and 2027 for the 28, so that we can educate ourselves as an industry for the 28 renewal. That feels aggressive in its timeline. So realistically, does that happen? I'm not sure. That might mean that it's the next round of talks, but I don't think over the next decade, if we look 5 years out, 10 years out, we're going to see any less volatility. We're in the volatility we see now from month to month. I think is measurably the same as what we saw from volatility year to year. Price volatility, input costs, sort of the overall news cycle feels like it's getting faster and faster. And our data is showing the changes from, economically between, 2006 to 2025, that 20-year history, that chart looks incredible relative to the 20 years before it. And most of that volatility is in that last few years. It's crazy how we've seen it. And we sort of dodged a bullet as an industry because of the cool July we had this summer. That could have been another, really bad outcome. We were really close to a bad outcome if we would have seen some higher temperatures through July this year in Western Canada. But we sort of lucked out and ended up with a perfect July, but we didn't have perfect rain. That was the problem. And so that's not going away. Climate change appears to be causing impacts in Canada. Not going to debate whether it's man-made or not, but we have to recognize the weather. We're seeing changes in rainfall, changes in thunderstorms, changes in the hail that we can measure with data. The science shows that it does happen. The volatility that we're seeing in the commodity markets and trade, I think is, we're in for this era of protectionism across, around the world. That's going to cause all sorts of havoc for the next number of cycles as we go from president to president to Senate in the U.S. I think that's going to be driving a lot of these volatility, and the same is going to probably happen in Europe, and we might see that same change in Canada. That chaos that'll be there is going to directly impact the bottom line of farms, and our ability as an industry to protect those farms from that volatility is a decision we need to make knowingly. We need to decide now, what is our goal of our BRM programs? Is it a subsidy? Is it protecting, to maximize the number of farms that are out in the rural areas? Is it, we're protecting small farms, large farms, all farms? How much money are we willing to do this? Is this food security? Is this economic sovereignty? We need to decide what those look like, and then once we've decided, build that suite of products that help us achieve that goal. And I think, as an industry, there's very different views of all of those things that I just mentioned that will change how you react to the volatility that we're already experiencing and probably going to experience over the next number of years. But this is not a time for slow decision making. This is a time to make action, decide, try things, and go. Because if we don't, we'll be looking back 10 years from now. We'll be looking back going, I'm sure wish we would have addressed that volatility that we can all see is happening right now. But we're doing nothing about it if we just continue to run the programs exactly as we're currently running them.
Right. I lied, and I'm going to ask a follow-up question. Sorry, your answer just gave me about 5 other questions, but I want to jump on this idea of you saying we have to act quickly, and really figure out what questions we're asking, what's the problem we're trying to solve. But then you also said that you have a 10 to 20% hope that things would change in the next APF, and that you think it might be, in 2 years. So where is that, I guess, 90 to 80% coming from? Is it because good change takes time, or there's not enough chaos yet, or the programs are so entrenched? What made you give that answer?
Well, I'd say 6 months ago, my odds of this change were under 5%. So I've significantly improved the odds of it happening, based on all the conversations I've had with various levels of government and trade groups and farm associations. 2 things that I do see though as problems. One is there is no single voice of the farmers to government. We have hundreds and hundreds of different voices all trying to get oftentimes the same thing, but they're saying it in slightly different ways. And then what I see is the government coming back and saying, well, you guys can't even agree what you want, so we're going to change nothing. When actually, probably 98% of the message is the same, but there's little tweaks around the 2% that is a slight change that serves that particular grower group, area, commodity, whatever. So I think there's a lobbying problem in Canada as far as like making change. We can't seem to go to industry. You can't take the industry as one voice. We like to see ourselves as hundreds of distinct industries. And I think that might be a mistake if this is, big change requires that alignment. And then the other side being the producers that are doing the work. That boomer generation is getting older. They're retiring. They're getting, health is going to be a concern where they're just going to be unable to continue with it. And so we're going to see some additional consolidation in the industry. That's just math. It's not, it's not people going broke. It's just the people eventually get too old to do the job anymore. And so it's very difficult to start a farm from scratch. So that means those businesses that take over are going to get bigger. And we're seeing that organic growth of of our farmers year over year. It's continuing to happen, and I think it's going to accelerate over the next 20 years. But with that, those farms that do take over, that are running, those farms that are building our industry, when we go from 20,000 farms to 10,000 farms in Western Canada, and it's an unfortunate reality, those 10,000 farms will have employees. They will have, boards of directors. They will have, probably multiple families being part of the shareholder group. They will have rental arrangements. They will have landlords. I think it's going to professionalize the industry. We're going to, see some people that were able to make a living farming for the last 40 years exit the industry, and making a living is great. But when those people are no longer a voting member of the industry, and we are focused on the professional farming that will inevitably take over, that group is going to want better. They are business people. They will want improvements to the things that their taxpayer dollars are paying for. They will be more organized. And I think we will see change happen because of this sort of professionalizing of the industry over time. And it's a sort of cause and effect. It's negative that we're going to see fewer people in the industry. That makes me sad. My dad is one of them, where I'm not actively farming. My farm is now, it's a name on my tenants that rent our land. It's the Sullivan place. And that, my heart, it hurts a little bit to say that. But the reality is that I'm just part of that story. My kids will be, landlords to another farm, to a farm family, or that farm family, or another one. But those people are professionals. Those people, it's my tenants are two brothers and a dad. They have multiple employees. It's a big business. That mentality that runs that big business is different than what my dad was able to do as a sole proprietor. He was incorporated, but was essentially a sole proprietor. I think that's going to just evolve, and the industry is going to see that over the next while. And as an insurer, that's what we're looking to do in the private industry, is serve that group of customers that's going to be here in the next 20 years. And we're focused on those professional management, business savvy farmers. That is our target market. And I think that eventually the BRM programs in the government will get there. They will realize it over time.
And Dave, that takes us back to where we started off, the premise of this podcast, which is to say we need ag policy to catch up to the changes that are taking place on farms and in food processors and kind of across the sector. And so we appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about your idea, and we will stay tuned to see whether or not you are overly optimistic at 10 to 20% change, or under optimistic. And stay tuned for, this kind of broad question around risk management is a big thing that really animates us at the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. So stay tuned for more from us on this topic over the year ahead. Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you.
Elise, you were just in Winnipeg last week at the Farm Management Canada's AgX conference, talking to farmers about risk management. What do you think those farmers would have thought about the conversation we just had with Dave?
I think a lot of it would resonate with them. I mean, it's things that they're thinking about. And what really struck me last week that carried into this conversation, and we didn't get to dive into it a bit too much with Dave, but was on the idea of questions. Are we asking the right questions? So in the workshop that Cappy and Emily did, we were talking about technology and innovation and digital technologies, but what do we do with that data? And what kept coming back to us was, well, what questions do we ask with this data? And I think that can resonate, that links into this risk management. There's so many components to it. There's so many players. And really it comes down to, what are the questions we should be asking? And if we can't get to that point, we can't make change. We need to have that common ground and know, what question are we answering? What problem are we solving? So that's definitely something that resonated with me today.
And I think it's one of the things that has stood in the way of this change. I think Dave talked about it. I think he actually laid it out really well, that our Crown Corporations and our crop insurance product today covers production risk for grains and oilseeds farmers really well. And so if you are one of those farmers, the question that you're probably asking is, why would I change anything? Because I've got something that works relatively well for me. But he also talked about the volatility that they're seeing on the balance sheets of the farmers that they work with, the volatility I think that we all see across the geopolitical landscape and everything else that farmers are facing. But if you look at what do all of those other farmers need, what do all of those farmers that aren't served by that kind of core product of crop insurance from a crop insurance administrator, I think that there is a big question around how do we get better products to them? How do we make the change that's needed to get change to them?
Yeah, and I think something that also really struck me is that role of producers and um, proactive versus reactive risk management, and really understanding what found at the foundation of it. What is the role of a producer and in terms of like a principle of risk management, and what is the role of government, and what is the role of private insurers? So there's definitely those added components there.
One of the big challenges, one of the big barriers, I think at the end of the day, is that different farmers will see their role in all of this differently. One of the things maybe I would have disagreed with Dave and had we not gone a little bit longer than we were supposed to, I would have got into this with him. But I actually think on this issue in particular, this idea that we should have that a farmer speaking with one voice isn't the right one, because what farmers need, depending on your farm management approach, and I often think it's more about farm management approach and less about commodities or regions in this case, but what you need from a risk management perspective really does vary and is very different. And it's not surprising that farmers are going to have different opinions. They should have different things because they need different things based on their own particular model. Again, somebody that's a very large family farm doing grains, doing wheat and canola and pulses in Saskatchewan is going to need a different set of risk management tools compared to a cow-calf operator, compared to a fruit and vegetable farmer in Nova Scotia. It's going to depend on, are they new entrants? Are they old? Have they been in the business for 30 years? Are they do they have other off-farm risk management tools? So I think that one of our barriers has been that we expect everybody to want the same set of tools. The federal government only wants to offer everyone the same set of tools, but farmers are so different and the risk management needs are so different. One of those innovations I think that Dave talked about is being able to give farmers the tools that they need. And that's something that I think we should have a more open, honest conversation about.
Then I'm going to ask you a question. Is there a uniting thing? I know for sure it's not one voice, but then is there a united question or like what risk management is? I know in terms of tools and delivery and what that looks like on farm is very different, but is there one thing or something that does unite farmers while still acknowledging and respecting the diversity and uniqueness of each operation across the country?
I think the problem is that, there should be this uniting call for action around we want effective risk management tools. The difference is that if you are, again, a grains and oilseeds farmer in Canada, you are probably well positioned to think that the tools that you've got today have, up until at least maybe recently, been pretty effective tools for you. And that's where the difference is I think everybody would agree we want effective risk management tools. What they don't agree on is how effective the current approach is or isn't. And I think that that's where we run into issues in this space. And I think that that's what we have to try and overcome if we want change. And I think if governments were more willing to recognize that the tools are effective for some, but not all, and we need a different set of solutions for some, but not all, we would probably get to a different world. But what we have often seen and heard from governments is if we're going to make changes, we need to make changes for everybody. And I do think that just makes it that much harder to try and get change because we end up then trying to, again, find a set of solutions that work for everybody when they aren't probably united, when it is hard to unite around a common set of challenges because the risks that they face is different, their capacity to manage those risks are different, the tools that are already available to them are different. And so, again, we should unite around effective risk management tools, but it's hard. And it's made harder by the fact that kind of how farmers experience risk is just so very different today.
Right. And just to, in closing, add another layer to that, going back to your productivity versus profitability discussion with Dave, what is effective for each farmer? It's going to vary widely as well. So I don't think this is going to be our last conversation on risk management in agriculture. We've had a lot of good discussion today and lots of ideas for future conversations, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us. If you yourself have any big ideas, we want to hear from you. So please contact us if you have a big idea for change in Canadian agriculture.
Thank you to Dave Sullivan for joining us today. Thank you for tuning in to the Ag Policy Connection, a podcast where we talk about those big ideas and fresh thinking needed to solve the big challenges and seize the big opportunities facing Canadian agriculture and food. Thanks, Elise.
Thanks, Tyler. See you next time.